Hey everybody. How's it going? Give everybody half a second to join in here. Hey Nish, glad to see you again. Alright, get the repo real fast. Time to hit some RPC APIs. My Sunday morning ain't bad. A little slow moving at the start. I'm burning on both ends a little bit, but having fun doing it. So really, it was just a matter of getting my energy levels up to the point that I was ready to get back to having some fun. Cleaned up a little bit. How about you, Nish? Working on a Sunday. Well, what the heck, man? I was debating whether or not to start kind of this relatively early for a Sunday, right? Nobody's jumping on YouTube or Twitter to see what's going on. Well, hopefully. I don't know. But you know what? These streams go so long, I figure eventually people will get in the mood for it and show up. Alright. So I'm just going to dive back into where we left off. So recap on where we left off. After the last stream, we managed to get our data model pretty well put together. We spec'd out all of our schemas, which are the schemas folder of the repo. We put together our mechanisms for the database, for both the server databases as well as the individual user databases. Those are all in Hyper-V, so those are all peer-to-peer databases. And now we are prepping to write the RPC API for the server so that we can get started on the front end and actually start bringing an app together. One of the things that we got to think about with the RPC API, of course, we got to think through all the business logic of each of the individual methods. Also need to start thinking about authentication and permissioning around all of this. So we'll have to hit that as we are prepared to do it. Might actually be a good idea to start with thinking about authentication because, you know, you kind of want to have your all that in place whenever you start working on the different pieces. So I think that's where I'm going to start here. Now they have this authentication system in the WebSocket thing. In this API we're using this login call. So let's see what this is. I don't know if this is just some kind of something they baked into the RPC WebSockets API to make things kind of more convenient, but it's actually just like a normal method call, or might be doing basic auth on the WebSocket connection. So let's see what that's about. great if they had some kind of overview of how their whole auth thing is designed. Like, you know, on the server side, for instance, does this authentication get attached to the API calls somehow? No, we're using WebSockets and JSON RPC. gRPC is a little heavier than I prefer. And the way that's designed, and reason I want to do it that way, is because our client code, I'm able to use a proxy object to basically, well, let's go into this API. You can basically do anything, because the first thing will be an object, so users gets created by the proxy, and then get also gets created by the proxy, and just transports this string into a JSON RPC call over the wire. And if it's actually a method that the server exposes, it'll work. And if not, you'll get a method not found error code coming back from JSON RPC. So this keeps us from, you know, really reduces our coordination costs between the server and the client. No manifests or anything like that. And the situation with, you know, talking to the server, I feel like that's appropriate. We may end up wanting to introduce some APIs for describing, where you could, you know, call like something like API.getManifest or API.describe APIs, something like that, so that you could always probe an endpoint that you're not familiar with and kind of learn about it. But that's sort of a special case that we don't need to worry about, at least at this stage. All right. So let's figure out, see if we can't find some documentation on how this whole auth thing works. I appreciate that they have these login and auth functions, but I need to know so that's a very coarse-grained solution. They had this way to mark RPC methods as protected or public, but I mean, that's helpful, but that's not everything we need. What I really need to be able to do is find out who's authenticated, find out their credentials. Which, somewhere on the server, there ought to be something, like in the handler, it's given a socket ID. I'm not sure that's super helpful. May have to dig into their code to figure this out. Of course, we could just not use their authentication methodology. We could do something of our own, but obviously it'd be a lot easier if we could get this in from, you know, use what they've built for us. All right, well, looks like we have to dig into some code, huh? TypeScript. I'm going to complain every time. All right, so that's the common client, and then we got this lib server. I imagine it might be possible to take the socket ID and translate that, you know, call get on like the server. So maybe like the server has like a get socket information method where you pass in a socket ID. All right, so whenever there's a socket connection, it's going to give it a UUID, and then it's got this authentication boolean. And is it storing the socket somewhere? Maybe it isn't handle RPC. Okay, no. Well, no, that's on events. So that has some logic around managing events, but that's not what we're looking for. Store socket end method. Okay, so in the namespaces, I may need to look into how their namespaces are supposed to function, because I'm not really using the namespaces right now, and maybe I ought to be. So let's take a look at that real fast. Ooh, namespace. Okay, now, so that's like, if you want to have multiple endpoints, so that's not what I'm looking for. Which means that it's going to be using the default namespace, which is slash. So if I go to the default namespace, I should be able to get the socket. So let's take a look at... Okay, so their default authentication is rpc.login, which I don't love. That's not how I would do it. Maybe able to change that. What else we got to look at here? So they're just marking protected or not. Closing a namespace. Okay, makes sense. Nothing more to say there. I get the event code. Oh yeah, of is how you go into a namespace. Not interested there. Kitty cat. Want to say hi to the stream? Alright, let's see. So this is handling the RPC. And I'm not saying anything related to auth here. So it's looking like probably, how do they define when they do their default auth handler? They did just create set auth function. Okay, so that's where you're setting a special one. All good, you can come and go as you like. So what's the namespace definition? Because if that's where they're storing the clients there. Let's look at their documentation around the clients. Because bare minimum, we're going to need to map the socket ID to the clients and get a client for a given ID. You'd think they would document their tooling around authentication beyond just this really coarse-grained, is it public or protected? That's just nonsense. Let's see how they enforce that. Maybe this has to do with some of the stuff that's getting inherited from the WS module. Because I noticed that some of this API is under-documented on account of that. So this gets into us doing a separate form of authentication here, which I'm sort of inclined to do. The more that I look at how under-spec'd the WebSocket RPC WebSockets things is. I think I'd rather just do it through basic auth. So I should be able to do what's going on right here, where on the upgrade I can look at the requests parameters and then pass it off to the WebSocket server to handle the upgrade. But I imagine I should see how that's happening here. So why don't I search inside of this repo for the upgrade handling. Oh, maybe it doesn't do any. Interesting. Let's look at our code. So in over here, we create the server, then we pass into WebSocket server the server object. So let's see what it does with that. That'll be in the server constructor. And that gets passed up to WebSocket server from there. So that sets this .woss. And it doesn't do anything. Does it not call handle upgrade anywhere? No. Okay, so it seems like maybe I can listen to this and do exactly this bit from the upstream dependency that the RPC WebSockets is working with. Seems like a likely option here. Let's kind of just look around through all the documentation they have. Oh, that's it. That's what I'm inclined to do. I prefer to do basic auth for this. And so then I'll have that socket, and I think this is the same socket which they will be storing in all this stuff, so I should get the socket ID. Okay, I think I know what to do. So let's add that upgrade handler. And we are going to do a temporary definition for authenticate. Client. What is that client parameter? Okay, let's see what that does to us here. Invalid frame header. Interesting. So we did get the request. Oh wow, it's still trying repeatedly. Huh. I'm guessing something about this is screwing with it. Okay, so that works a little better here for us. A little better. And so I need to figure out what this object is that's getting dumped in here. It's the request object, which I'm guessing is like an HTTP, like a Node.js request. Oh, come on. Stop trying. Keeps on retrying, and that's making it impossible to examine that object. Let's make an assumption about what this object looks like and see if that helps us here. Yeah, okay. So basically, we need to see if it's trying to authenticate, and if so, do the authentication, and if not, we just let it go. Actually, interestingly though, this shouldn't be failing like this. So it's throwing, and it shouldn't be throwing. I'm guessing. Let's find out. It is. Okay, so handle upgrade is getting dual called somehow. I find that interesting. How is that happening? So the question is, who's calling handle upgrade right now, and we got to make sure that we're actually doing this correctly, because if not, obviously this approach is a no-go. I actually want you to look into... I mean, that can't be right. Alright, time to go code diving. Gonna go into the WS module and do some logging in this line right here. wslib WebSocket server. And we're looking for line 246. Okay, and what we actually want is right here. We want to do a console.log with an error stack. Find out who's calling it the first time. Okay. So the first time seems to be calling it on itself. Oh wait, server, yeah. So then it seems like what it suggested in the README is not the right path, because it's suggesting that we are supposed to handle client authentication, but maybe that only works if we do what is going on there. Yeah, it's not clear to me why it's telling us to do handle upgrade manually like this, but well, let's see what this example is, because this is what we're looking for, is a complete example. Well, maybe if we were listening and handling... Yeah, but who's calling upgrade here? I guess it may not matter, to be honest. Because if handle upgrade can happen whenever, I suppose. Question is, we just need to have a chance to run authentication on the request. And then abort the connection if it's invalid credentials. So I'm not going to worry about this for now, and hopefully that won't bite us. I feel like I say that a lot in the stream. I'm not going to worry about that for now. Hopefully that's okay. But here we are. So obviously doing it's too late to send that response, because at this point it seems like, based on the error we were getting earlier, the WebSocket is already established. And it's telling us that the framing was wrong. That suggests to me that this is supposed to be a WebSocket message coming down, and that's probably not the right form for it. Now, that's an interesting situation, though, because that means if we are handling the authentication before the upgrade is allowed to complete, that means that we don't have a good way to tell them that authentication failed. So that actually is a problem. All right. Well, so WebSocket server.onConnection is, I believe, getting handled over in our RPC WebSocket bit right there. So, feeling like we're getting boxed in. Well, as long as we can get the socket, we don't have to do authentication in the request. We could just do it through a login RPC method. So, let's do a quick test. Let's just attach a socket.auth on the upgrade, and that will be by default setting it to some kind of neutral unauthenticated state. And then let's find out if we can actually add a login method here. And log out. And these shouldn't be a spread. I believe that's the signature here. That's socket ID. Yep. So then we need to see if we can do WebSocket server dot. Want to try to get that some namespaces dot. And let's see, where's the namespace definition? Generate namespace. Okay, that's clients dot get at the socket ID. Okay, let's see if that's going to work for us here. API.accounts.login. It did work, and did have the .auth on it. It doesn't appear to, so it's this. No, so that's not the right object I was attaching to on upgrade. And actually, I don't necessarily know if I have to attach anything on that upgrade. Really what matters is, let's just say we pretend that the login was successful. And now we're just gonna log the value of it. So the first login, it should log an empty object. Second time it did stick. Okay, so we have our pieces now. We know how to get a client. We're going to need to wrap a little bit of this to make it cleaner. I'm thinking we add a method to the WS server object that is a helper for wrapping all of our RPC methods. Yeah, so here's what we're going to do. In our top API setup, we're going to wrap register. Yeah. No. What do you suggest? I suppose it might be smarter not to wrap like that. I mean, what do we think here? What's the right move? Actually, that's not even right. It would be taking in the string, the method name, and then the method handler. And it needs to actually be a function, not an arrow function, because we need to preserve the this. And then, yeah, actually what we would need to do is be wrapping the method handlers, is what we have to do here. So it's a little bit of the old double wrap, where we're going to call the original register. But we're going to wrap the method handler, and that's going to take in params and socket ID. And we're going to add this code right here. And then we'll call it the method handler. And rather than passing in the socket ID, we're going to pass in the actual client, because this is just ugly boilerplate to have every time. And that worked. Okay. So now we need to give ourselves a couple of utilities around the auth method, I think, methodology. Like I suppose, for instance, accounts.logout becomes client.auth equals undefined. And then this needs to have some logic around now that could throw if they don't actually pass. Yeah, we're working on Citizen today. But I love the enthusiasm. So we should probably validate the params before we try to destructure like that, because if they don't pass in. Alright. So I want to create some utility functions for validation. Actually, why don't we look if there's a good module for validation before we go writing our own. Could always use the JSON schemas, but that feels like overkill. Maybe not, though. We do have AJV all set up. Yeah. Why don't we do that? A little bit of overkill, but I don't care too much. Yeah, I'm thinking AJV. And I guess actually it might also make sense to wrap some of the boilerplate here, like so. Gonna have to move that out of databases probably, but we'll leave it there for now. And so then this will be it's not really ideal to be, we probably could actually do a create validator and just do this. Yeah. And then username. And let's, to make life a little easier, add an assert to the validate function that's similar to this right here. All right. that seems about as clean as this could get. You don't want to have to do a bunch of manual validation. And to do validate credentials, but for now, we'll just pretend like it's always right, and we're all set. So let's see if all that worked. API.login, and we'll just first do API.accounts.login. Can't read property assert of undefined. Did I forget to return it? I did. Something else I forgot to do. I need to do required username and password. Let's try again. Well, that's very nice of you to say. Can't read property schema of undefined. Yep. All right. Should be object. That is a terrible failed validation. What did I pass into it? I passed in the wrong thing. I should have passed in param 0. But should be object. Good grief. That's a not helpful message. So let's... Okay, so there, of course, it worked. So I'm going to get rid of the password field. This will fail validation. Should have a well, it's not bad. It would just be good if it also says something like, parameter error or something like that, or validation error. So why don't we let's try doing that real fast and see if it gives us a better error output. Yeah, that's better. Okay. So now we have a sort of an authentication solution. That's good. We're going to leave those two for now. And why don't we start on posts? So there's a couple things we could use here that would be helpful. Let's start with the CRUD. Let's start with create. Let's just kind of dig in. I'm going to move schemas into lib. Love that automatic imports fixing. It's always handy. Okay, so that looks good. And so then let's pull in the validator code. And probably can just use the post validator as opposed to creating a custom one for create and edit. So let's do so Fantasy's asking if I've noticed any uptick in users. Let's take a look. I'm going to do this off the stream so that nothing gets leaked out here, as I'm sure you understand. Okay, so I'll load up my analytics dashboard real quick. Usually I can kind of get an approximate sense of whether or not we're getting an uptick based on other kinds of chatter, so I don't just stay glued to our analytics. And I've seen, you know, some things that would suggest we'd see a little more, but let's find out exactly how much. Yeah, a little bit. It's relatively minor, but we basically tripled our number of new users on January 11th, January 12th-ish. Yeah, had a bit of a bump right after. Nothing to change the story or anything, but people definitely checked us out in response. So, something. Okay. Now, I'm actually not going to use the JSON, the database schemas, because that kind of includes this whole process of the await fetch and stuff, which Fantasy is asking for some differences between what we do and what Signal does. Signal, their entire organization is about secure private messaging with encryption that's protected end to end. And while we have some tooling around that for our stack, it's not sort of our reason for existing. We're more focused on having systems that are not centrally controlled and finding ways to create new authority models that are more responsive to what people need. And Signal has a bunch of servers that runs everything on Signal. It's not a decentralized text messaging network. It's actually pretty interesting if you go look up Moxie Marlin Spike's talks about why they chose not to do decentralization. Spurred a lot of debate about this matter, but I can kind of understand why they chose to focus on the security as opposed to focusing on decentralization. It's one of those things where it's hard to do both. So I don't necessarily hold any negativity around that decision. It's not one that I personally chose, but I can understand the logic. So we're focused more on decentralizing authority throughout the internet, and they're focused on improving security on the internet. Two different goals. Okay, so when you create a post, you're going to have the post object, and the validation will probably occur when the write is attempted, so I'm not going to worry about validating that ahead of time. We're going to need to get the user record so we can find their database. So we're going to need to get the user database here, so we'll import the user DBs. And then if they're not authenticated, that's a throw right there. And then we're going to try to get the user DB. That should probably never happen, but if it does, it does. And then it's simply await user db dot posts dot maybe put make sure I got that right. Yep, posts, that's a table. And tables have a put method, I do believe. They do. And I'm going to use the current date as the ID. And then we'll just pass in the post object. So we'll do let post ID, actually const post ID. And then we'll just return that post ID. That's all good, Fantasy. What are the most suitable languages for decentralized apps coding? In a lot of ways, I think that actually JavaScript is a pretty sensible choice. The reason for that is that it is just able to run in so many different contexts. And so that has largely driven my thinking around that. Oh, I need to save it. There we go. So let's start by trying to make a post without, oh, you know what? There's more that I need to do here. Let's take a look at the post schema. I need to add the created at. So all I need to pass in from the client is the text. Must be logged in as expected. User database not found. That's interesting. Let's take a look at what the user database looks like here. And obviously I don't want to have to call login all the time. So I need a solution to that. And I think the solution to that is to jump down into our server and do wserver.on connection, and they have an event that they fire, and I can just go ahead and attach the yeah, so it's the socket. Yeah. I'm going to call it client for consistency. I'm just going to set client.auth username, be crazy. And I need to clearly mark this debug. Okay, hopefully that saves us from having to call login every time. Can't read property validate of undefined. Huh. So that's a different error than what we got before. What we got before was we had run login, and then we ran, and then it said user database not found, which means that the username was wrong. Now why is that? Let's dig into that. Alright, so let's take a look at the client.auth object. Let's take a look real quick at the login method and what it's doing there. Client.auth username. Should be fine. So let's find out. So in that case, it's what was set previously. Now what happens if I call login and try again? Username is undefined. That's bizarre. Oh gosh. This is going to really jam me up, this whole params array being passed in. Okay, so that solved that, but now we're getting can't read property validate of undefined. So let's look into that. Why is that happening? So that means that for some reason post.put is failing. Gotta make sure it's happening where I think it is real quick by logging some numbers and making sure that what we should see is 1 logs but not 2. Yep. So it's happening inside of assert valid. And I can't read validate of undefined. So why would this .schema be undefined? Because it's this .validate. So that was just broken from a previous commit. There we go. Okay, so there's our create function handled. Now let's do the update function. Fantasy, that's, again, really nice of you to say. Fantasy is asking what kind of failures will have to happen for people to start to notice, we'll just say decentralization in general. I don't know. I mean, I think people are starting to get turned on to it based on what's going on, but there's really a couple of different things I think that strike me as how people will start to notice this kind of work. First thing you have is like what occurred with Parler and Trump, which, regardless, I think, of your position about Parler and Trump themselves, I think a lot of people were somewhat startled by that what it demonstrated with in the monopoly power that certainly the social media platforms have, but even to a degree Amazon, and I have some varied thoughts about exactly what that is, what that represents, what Amazon was able to do. Like, to some degree, I'm kind of like, well, Parler got dumped by like every vendor here, so like it was a number of companies, but I'm more inclined to think about the significance of Twitter and Facebook and YouTube banning the president of the United States. It's a big deal. It's a really big deal, and it is a lot of power for them to have. And to my way of thinking, I actually, and I'll get to the second point about what's going on related to this, I'm of the opinion that the editorial process that occurs, the moderation process, that does exist right now. I mean, we always talk about free speech in terms of whether or not you're allowed to tweet, but we don't talk about free speech in terms of your involvement in the algorithms that are pushing any given piece of content. Any kind of algorithm designed to affect trending or recommendations or discovery, that's an editorial process. And so sometimes when I see people talking about how free speech should, we should be preserving what we have, I'm kind of like, well, we kind of have almost a heavy constraint on free speech as it is if you're taking that framework, because we don't have any control over the algorithms and we don't have any control over the UIs and the data schemas and things like that. But moreover, that kind of relates to the second thing, which is, in addition to concern about monopoly powers, what I see the most from people when I talk to them about news, media, politics, is confusion. I think people are massively confused by the ecosystem of media. I think they don't know who to trust or what to trust. I think there's such an absolute noise of perspectives and about what's even occurring on a factual basis at this stage, that is something that we just collectively have got to figure out. How are we going to deal with this problem of people just not even understanding what's going on in the world anymore? Again, I think that connects to the editorial question, because we may all trust that a post by by Trump came from Trump, perhaps, or that he has the right to say it. But how do we trust the process that decides what's getting recommended? Or how do we trust like that what's trending isn't the result of a bunch of sock puppet accounts pushing up some bullshit, you know, which we all know happens. We all know that once, you know, whether it be state actors, you know, governments or just companies or whatever, once they realized that they could create a bunch of fake accounts or whatever you have to do to get your message out there, they started to do it, destroy the authenticity of the entire concept. If you think back on like 2010, 2011, people were so infatuated with Reddit because they were like, this is like some kind of authenticity of the editorial process. And then eventually we sort of lost that perspective, maybe for good, I don't know. But it certainly, we kind of realized this is not as authentic as we claim. And there have been a number of people that have demonstrated how cheap it is to game their way onto the front page of Reddit. And so I think we need to work on the authenticity of the system in every dimension, whether or not it's actually reflecting what it purports to reflect, whether or not something is trending because people in the community actually like it, or if it's being manipulated. We need more authenticity there. And then there's another kind of version of authenticity, which is just believing that the system is reflecting the interests of the people that it's meant to serve. And I think to do that, you need to have a lot more sophistication around how the my viewers just dropped to 0 on the board. Say something in chat if you're still there. I don't know if I just got nuked. See, here we go. I don't even know if it's possible that... Yeah, you're still there? Okay. I start laying down criticisms about YouTube and suddenly my viewer count drops to 0. I have a half a moment of feeling like, but that's my point. I wouldn't know. Anyway, so we need to, the health of the, thanks, Philip. Yeah, I mean, we need a healthier ecosystem here. We have got to, no interruption, no problem. But yeah, we've just got to find a way to make all this work better for everybody. So I did that blog post about this, which was kicking off this project, which I share a couple more thoughts about this and the mechanisms that we have to lead to a healthier social media. And why don't I just go ahead and drop that in? 1 second. Alright, so that's the post I wrote that directly kicked off this project here. Alright, so where are we at here? We're at posts.edit, and we're going to do the post ID, and then the post itself, which honestly just ought to be text. So we're going to then, first things first, we load the post from the user DB. Which would be userdb.post.get post ID, and then we're going to make sure it exists. And then we're going to just update the text. We'll call them entries instead of records. That's actually .value .text equals, and then it's just a put. All right, let's see if that worked. Okay, post not found. Well, maybe we ought to do post.get next, and then we can come back to this. So you don't actually need to be logged in. Huh, you know, this is actually... If you call them posts.get, you actually need to say what user name you're looking for. Oh, you're right, thank you. I missed that inversion. Thank you, Lars. Okay, so something was still wrong. Probably because I need to do post entry.value. There we go. Thank you, Lars. So now we got to think about how to, the post.get, it's not just the post ID, you also need to know what user you're fetching it from. So that's going to have to be username, post ID. Slightly different signature from the others, but I'm alright with that. That should do it. Let's make sure I'm reviewing before I move on. So you get the user. If it's not there, it's not there. Yep, looks good. Cool. Very cool. All right, finally we got delete. Now, something we should test real quick is whether or not passing in a number has a coercion problem. It does not. And we actually are not giving any information about whether or not it successfully deleted anything at this point. So it could actually be a wrong key and just say return true. So I'm going to choose not to worry about that though. Cool. Okay, so let's hit list user feed. And we're going to need to handle things like pagination here. The way the database is designed, our interface is actually, you pass in ranges that are like greater than and less than on the key ranges as opposed to, offset and limit. And it sort of works, but it would be nice to, let's take a look at the Hyper-B interface and see what the exact params are. Good. Okay. So that is actually all safe to pass in, I believe. we might want to always enforce a limit so that people aren't just blasting us with so nothing is required. Additional properties is no, because we're going to pass this through to our internal method. It's going to be less than or equal, greater than or equal, reverse, and limit. And we will do only, so you pass in the username and the ops. If the ops are there, then we validate. And then actually, we'll do it like this. Now, what do we want to set as a limit? Probably 100 at a time. And always at least one. So first request will give us nothing because I believe I deleted all my posts. List my feed, list user feed. Can't read property, limit of undefined. If ops is not defined, we need to define it. Yep, all right, so let's create a couple of posts. One, two, three. Let's call it again. Looking good. And let's test some of those options. Fork and authority. That's how you have contingent authority. It's important. So let's see if limit works. It does. That's it. Oh yeah, so it defaulted to 1 in that case. Good. Let's try reverse. That should put 3 at the top. Yep. Good. And now let's try range real quick. Sorry, this is probably really hard to see. There we go. Should be a number that's not correct, isn't it? It should be either a number or a string. Actually, it always needs to be a string. So let's try that again. Let's see if it, yeah, it does actually set itself back up automatically. That's handy. Yeah, great. Okay, sweet. I'm gonna take a quick bathroom break and then we'll get back into this. Mute my mic. right. Need to get some music on. Trying to think on how many hours it would be we have spent coding just to get that LTE working all the way down. Yeah, when you factor in, oh man, there's a lot in there. You know, the really incredible thing about that LTE working, y'all up for a little bit of a technical sort of sidebar on some of the hypercore stuff? Because this is pretty cool. I'm gonna grab a workshop that they made. I do agree that it is sort of possible. All right, so this workshop is really cool. It's a great explanation of how a lot of the magic in the hypercore protocol works. But, you know, the thing about hypercore protocol is what this looks like, the Hyper-V, it looks like a level DB, key value database. And, but internally, all hypercore instructions are append-only logs. And so the really interesting question is, how do you do a fast query of a range of keys whenever the writes are being done by like a log one after the other? You need to really quickly over the network fetch the exact entries in that log to get the current state of a given key space. And so Matthias and Andrew were talking through this for quite some time, coming up with different ideas, but they basically were like, we need a B tree that works on top of that log. And eventually Matthias sat down for like a week or so and just managed to finally crack that nut. And the way it works is pretty well described in that workshop that I linked, where it's what they call embedded indexes, or you might call them streaming indexes, or it's sort of like a subset of the B trees getting written with every entry, so that it kind of gives pointers back to different positions in the log, so that it can really quickly find where it needs to go, starting from the most recent message. Okay, I need to go to sequence 5. Okay, then I need to go to sequence 7, and it kind of gives you I think it's login round trips to collect all the entries you need for a given query. And so then on top of that, they use I think they call it a cache warm-up extension, where when you are talking to peers, you can actually tell them what query you're trying to satisfy, and they can go ahead and start streaming the results optimistically, and then you can check and make sure they're correct. So you don't have to trust the peer to satisfy the request correctly. And so that's how you're able to have a peer-to-peer B tree to produce something like this. It's really quite neat technology. And I found that workshop to be totally approachable, like shockingly so. So I strongly recommend it. Okay, so we're going to leave list my feed and list featured feed for later, because there's some details we have to solve around that first. All right. How did I structure the follow schema? Just a URL. Okay. What next? How about comments? Pretty similar to posts, so shouldn't be too hard for us to handle. There's been a lot of work. Years of work. I'm always downstream of the protocol work, really. I get involved at the API level. And I made the website for the site, for Hypercore, and I work on Beaker and things like this. So I've always been sort of more on the downstream of the core protocol work, and it's really Matthias leading that, and he has this excellent team of people he works with, and Andrew sort of helps him and me sort of 1 foot in each circle, helping on all that. And our kind of the core team that I work with all the time is Matthias, Andrew, and me. But there are some other folks that Matthias has brought together in a separate company that also do some work variously. Okay. Teamwork makes the dream work. Yeah, I agree. Peer-to-peer should have happened a lot sooner. All right, so some of these functions we can really just copy and paste. So that's a copy and paste. All right, let's do comments.create. Now let's look at our comment schema here. There's the subject, parent comment, text. Okay, so this should all validate, should all looks correct. Nothing to modify there. Let's jump over to edit. Probably would be smart to get some automated tests going, but YOLO. That would be smart, rather than me just doing the REPL. Ah, heck. Yeah, all right. So I'm using Ava, big fan of Ava. And I need to find how to do my setup and teardown. And I don't want to do before each, I actually want to do before all. I guess there's not... Um, Eva was built in the async await era, so it just kind of fits a little nicely into that. Tape isn't bad, but it was a little before that. Honestly, you're not going to go wrong either way, though. Is there an API reference? Okay, here we go. Okay. Eva seems to have more features and more of a framework than a pure module like tape. That sounds about right. Okay, and then we also need a client. that. Okay. All right, let's see if we're in working order here. So it's thinking that anything should be. Yeah, promises are pretty solid. I would recommend learning about them. How to ignore file in tests. How do I get it to ignore non-test files? Underscore. In that case, I'm moving it out of that lib. Let's try again. Test posts, unexpected equal sign, right there. So there's something wrong with my usage there. Maybe I need to write that in parentheses. Nope, not allowing it. Not having it. Huh. Well, I don't want to... If anybody knows how to do that desugaring... Not desugaring, but destructuring, rather. Can't read property close of undefined. Let's see what that's about. Huh. Okay, right, so I need to get my client. Yeah, okay, so first of all, I need to come over and get that code from the front end that I'm using for my Rpc APIs. And I need to create the Rpc API, and we'll do, we'll pass in the client. Okay, and we'll do const API equals await create Rpc API. We'll return that. Hey, it worked. Hey, that's exciting. Okay, so let's add that login over here. And then now I tend to have my tests depend on each other, which some people disagree with for good reason, but I do, so they need to be run serially. And I'm going to do t.is await. No, let's do let posts, and we're going to do post.push await api.post.create. And then we will check if the post.length is 3, which of course it will be. Nope, that'll be string. So we're gonna have to do our user creation, of course, for the test instance. Now that's interesting though, because this, I don't think I need to also have this thing producing temporary databases. Eesh. Yeah, that was pretty handy. Okay, it's pretty nice. So create server, it needs to be more than just a random port. It also needs to have a temporary directory in which it's storing its config. And be even better if we were either doing it all in memory in terms of the hypercore stuff or deleting that data afterwards, but I'm not going to worry about that for the moment. Instead, I am going to get it doing the having a config directory. And I believe there's a Node.js API I can use here. I believe it's os.tempdir should... That'll give me the temporary directory, but I'm going to have to create a temporary directory. You like Tempe better? Stick with the theme, right? Does he have a cleanup, an easy cleanup like this one does? The other one has a handy cleanup, which is pretty nice. So I'm gonna stick with this one since it's got the handy cleanup, which is right there, that o.cleanup. And so now I need to update our server definition to accept a non-default config dir. And that got used in the database code. Right there. So we'll pass that into the database setup. And that means, let's see, it's the OS Ah, of course. Let config path. Okay. So that should be all set. And let's actually just output that and not clean it up the first time to just make sure that's getting created and that all looks correct. Oh. Okay. Huh. So setup isn't getting completed. Why might that be? Let's see. Maybe okay, my computer is starting to really chug. What's going on? Come on, buddy. I'm running out of disk space or something? My CPU isn't running. Come on, hombre. Wow, what is going on? A little bit of memory pressure, but that's no big deal. Disk isn't full. CPU is, you know... Huh, I'm getting some really bad mouse stutter right now. Okay, well... let's see if... It'll take half a second, but sorry, I'm going to just try to clean up whatever my resource usage is doing. And now it's fixed, so don't know what that was. Okay. So for some reason the database setup is not being completed, and that would be probably because the start function is not awaiting a sufficient amount of time. We need to wrap this bit. That should fix that. Okay. So some of it worked correctly. That did not, because we need the port to be updated. So we'll have to deal with that next. But everything else looks correct, so we can now go ahead and clean up that temp directory. We'll go ahead and still log it. Now that we have a configurable port. Thanks for joining, Philip. Hopefully we'll catch you on the next one. Alright, so this is pretty ugly, but I'm just going to have the schemas.js allow you to do it like this. Actually, this isn't so ugly. This is somewhat appropriate. Default to false, but if this gets called, it'll just turn it on. at the given port. And there'll be one other thing to do, which is debug mode. And if that's set, hey Kai, welcome to the stream. Somebody you know is skydiving? It's exciting. Wow. Well, all the best on that. That's really cool. Hope they have a great time. I've never skydived, but I probably would. And we're going to turn debug mode on in the start for now. That'll be temporary, but here it'll always be on. And let's try one more time. Okay, so that cleanup didn't work. Why would your cleanup function be upset about there being files in it? Unsafe cleanup. It's not that unsafe. Cool. So now we need to automatically create a temporary user. So on that front, we do export the DB module, so I think I can do await inst.db.create user. Actually, I always like using Bobo or Bubbo. All right, let's see if that works. Oh, found a new bug. This is what your tests are good for. Release is not a function. Because I need to await it. How about that? There you go. This is why tests, automated tests are a good idea. Await lock is so a constructor. Must be giving me more of that import nonsense. Okay, can't read property put of undefined. Yeah, our whole create user method is screwy. Now it's failing on what, line 54, user.profile. So let's take a look at the user object and see what's wrong there. Ah, I double defined it. Oh, it's not that I double defined it, it's that this should be called userdb. No, t.ok is not a function. I could have sworn. Sorry, Philip is gone now. I thought t.ok was one of Ava's test assertions, but looks like that's not the case. Nope, it's not. And I changed the wrong one. Boom. Okay, so we're sort of almost in action, but this also just demonstrated that we have another bug in our user database. Yeah. So there's just an incorrect bit right here. So let's commit some of these updates here. Nothing on the Rpc APIs because we're still working on that. Okay. And so now we can get back to the business of testing. Now, it's still bothering me a little bit that we're creating a bunch of databases, of Hyper-V databases, that aren't going to be... every time we run the tests, we're creating new Hyper-V databases that will be just sort of sitting in the cache. So that's not really ideal. It would be better to create a temporary hyperspace daemon. But I'm not going to worry about that, at least not for now. But I am going to go grab myself a drink. So BRB. So let's finish up our posts tests, and then we can start working on the comments API again. Finally get back into list user feed, and that would be for Bobo. T.is post entries.length 3, and we'll test the limit API there. We'll also test reverse, and so check that the orderings are correct. So that'll be post 0.post ID. Should probably be returning key instead of post ID, since that's what it's called when you do a list operation. So we're going to change that real quick over in the posts. And then we're going to test reverse. And let's test their values real quick. do an edit. And finally a delete. Okay, where did that... I need to wrap it in a function, t.throws. Okay. It's bothered that the exception is not an error. And that's going to make debugging this hard, so I'm going to go over here and modify our wrapper here. Okay, now we're in business. So posts are in good order, so now it's time for comments. And during the setup, we'll create 2 posts to comment on. And this will be comments.create. And so now we're going to get into a question around how to construct URLs, because that's going to be a common requirement here. Okay, so now we have this question about how to deal with URLs. Currently our APIs are only responding with keys. It'd be handy if they responded with URLs. But we could also just let the URL construction happen on the client. Which I'm sort of inclined to do to make life easier. I don't know what makes life easier here, to be honest. Is it better to make the API simple, or is it better to make the API featureful? That's the question we have to contend with here. I'm kind of inclined to keep the API simple. But then, you know, you're sort of putting it onto the clients to, no, I'm gonna, yeah, probably should be responding with URLs. Okay. All right, let me think. So now we have to think about the URL structure of all the different kinds of content. So what schemas do we need to deal with here? We'll need to deal with the comment, of course. Oh, man. We got user, which is just that. What else we got? There's maybe follows. No, probably not. I think that's it for now. here we're going to need to import set origin from lib strings. Speed localhost :port. Okay, now where we actually want to do this, I think, is at the database level, where anytime records are being returned, we're going to add these pieces of information. Yeah, that seems right to me. So in the get, we do entry.url equals, we're going to import construct URL from strings. And we'll do construct URL this.schema.url. Oh gosh, but we don't know things like the user here. So we can't do it at that layer. It has to be at the RPC layer. That's a shame. Oh well. Okay, same story over here. All right, well, let's see what we get. We got a post entry is not defined. Where did I make that mistake? Right there. Record key is not defined. I'm guessing that's over here. Yep, it's inconsistent in my camel casing. Cannot read property URL of undefined. And our RPC is not giving us stack traces, which is not great. Let's take a quick look at, all right, that's happening in line 38, so it's happening here actually. Yeah, it's because I'm doing pushes to the wrong array, so let's fix that. And now we're down to that nightmare. An error with no message. Now that might be because of something I'm doing here, so let's just log all errors that come back from the RPC and see what might be happening there. Server response malformed. Must include either result or error, but not both. Huh. It included both, you say? Let's find out why. And the only way to do that, I think, is to take a look at what that thing got. So RPC WebSockets dist-lib client. At line 433. Let's just log the message. Looks like I must have returned undefined somewhere because it's missing the, it doesn't have either error or result. And you have to have something, and you're not allowed to return undefined. I think a simple way to fix that actually would be to just save ourselves from this kind of pain by using our API wrapper here. And then return true if I accidentally return undefined. Should make life a little easier. Okay. That was a failure, you say, in posts. Line 38. Post entries. I bet I forgot to return. Let's see, in posts, list, user feed. I did indeed forget to return the entries. Okay. Boom, we're in business. So now let's, gotta get some more music going here. Okay, so now we're going to need some getters in the comments API, which looks like we got. So let's take a look at what our comments look like. Yeah, that would probably be better, Lars, but it's also not a huge deal either way. But you're right, I am sort of misusing the thing. No need to apologize, you're totally right. Okay, so something went wrong there. Let's take a look at our comments. So line 58, so it's the first one. The subject URL isn't correct. I need to be testing the value and not just because it's in a wrapper object each time. That is real easy to forget. Okay. Looking good. So now let's get our edit. Make sure that's in a good spot. So you might, this ought to be if the text is defined, then we're going to set the text. And same story on basically every one of them. So there's that. Actually, I suppose the right way to do this would be for let kn comment. So first we're going to try editing. Okay, looks like editing worked. Interesting question as to whether or not we ought to allow actually the subject or the parent to be changed after posting. It actually kind of is a definitional change to the comment that maybe we shouldn't allow. Yeah, actually I think that's accurate. We should only allow it to edit the text. And we'll make sure that fails. And all we gotta do is, we'll do example.com and it'll just have no effect. Okay. So now, let's go ahead and implement delete. We don't have to do return true every time now. Okay, that's deletion. So now we need the thread list. And something else that just occurred to me is I think we need, yeah, we have the comment index. We need to get this into play here. We also need to think about transactionality. No, I'm not too worried about the transactions of editing the comments, but when we talk about the index, that becomes more of a concern. I gotta pace. I'll be right back. Okay. So this is looking right. One thing I'm going to do though is I'm going to remove the subject URL. And the subject URL will be encoded basically in the key of the common index. Actually, no. We'll leave it in there just to keep life simpler. One thing that occurs to me is, right, what I just did earlier, I set it up so that you're not allowed to modify the subject URL or the parent comment URL, but actually we can't enforce that globally, so that may not be a... we'll have to see how that pans out. Another interesting thing to think about here is with an index, similarly, we actually want to write the code so that it's not building these indexes at time of write, because let's say, for instance, we get to the point where users are providing their own databases, they'd be doing the comment creation elsewhere, so we need these secondary indexes to actually be constructed by some kind of secondary process that's watching the databases for changes and then creating the indexes automatically. So I think the way to handle that for now would be to write some of the logic for producing the secondary indexes and then manually calling it here, which we'll want to do either way. But then later on, we'll probably want to introduce a way to watch the databases for those changes to trigger the index updates automatically. I'm not going to worry about that quite yet, but I think what we want to do is go to the server database and add a function for this. And I'm going to write it one way to start with, but it's probably going to have to change over time. So change is going to be an object that's going to be either type put or delete, and the value, and then the URL of the item that changed, and the key of the item that changed. We'll say that's what we're going to be predicting here. And when this occurs, we're going to do we're going to fetch the current index for the value. So we're going to do this dot comments idx. Actually, this will be the same logic either way. Oh, the deletes. We're going to have the previous value in those situations. Alright, not going to worry about that. So we're going to get, and the key is going to be change.value.subject URL. And so we're going to get that, and that will throw if it doesn't exist yet. So we're going to catch in that case, and we're going to respond with an empty entry, which has to look like subject URL and comment URLs. And then on put, we add the URL, though we gotta check if it already exists, so and then on the delete side, actually we'll want the index either way. If it doesn't exist, then we add it, and then on delete, if it does exist, we delete it. And then we put this back into the comments entry. We do await this.comments idx.put at the key, the value. Yeah. Does this make sense to everybody what we're doing here? We're just trying to maintain a secondary index. And so over in the comments area, whenever a new comment is created, not really following, it's all good. We need to get the public database, public server DB. And we need to pass input and change has a value. So I'm going to need to get the value of this thing. Yeah, okay, so that all looks right. Let's change that value. It's all good, Lars. It's not super important that, you know, if I were really concerned about people following along, I'd be taking more time to be clear about what I'm doing here. Just to be defensive, I'm going to also have the comment index get updated on edit, even though that's not wholly necessary. Oh, I need to pass in the URL. Yep, you're up to speed. Okay, so I think I did it. I think that's correct. So now our list thread bit should look like we get out the comments index. And if that throws, that means there's nothing there, so we return an empty array. And then we're going to go through, we need to get the keys of keys and usernames of each of the comments out of the URLs in that index. Why don't we, for now, just return the actual index and see what that looks like. We should get out 4 entries out of this. Fingers crossed. So something failed pretty quick. Of course, I'm not getting any stack dump. So let's see exactly where that failed. Looks like it's failing on the first write. I put the variable declaration in the try. You're right. Son of a gun, man. You're on top of it. Alright, still failing for unrelated reasons, however. It's failing on the create. I'm guessing something about this here that I'm doing wrong. It's saying it can't read value of null. So that tells me something I'm passing into update comments index is wrong. Okay, so it's failing after B but before C. Okay, and so now I may be misexpecting what get does if it's nothing there. I am. Okay, we're getting closer here. None of this threw any errors, at least. What did I... Not get thread? What is it called? List thread. I'm changing that to get thread. That feels a more natural name for that. Okay. And now that is working correctly. That's great. Let's check again now after the delete to see that it is correctly updating the index. It is. One other thing we need to do here is get some locking done because there's async work occurring. When that index gets updated, we need to lock for the full extent of that. So we're going to import lock from liblock.js. Okay. So now we're getting into the zone where it would be nice to have type annotations. But I'm not quite ready to do that yet. But when I do that with JSDoc, which the TypeScript compiler is actually able to pick up, same as any other TypeScript, and it's pretty handy. We may get into that at some future date. All right. What next? Now we're back to this API here. We're getting a list of comment URLs. And now we need to parse them apart to get out the key and the username. And then we need to read each of them individually and assemble them into a thread. This is always a treat. Might make life easier on ourselves by just doing... Question is, do we want to assemble it into a thread on the server side or not? It's not terribly hard to do. And I probably would appreciate it as I'm working on my client side stuff, so I guess we will do that. Alright. First things first, we need to go through and fetch each of the comments. Let's see. I'm going to move this into a sub-function here to keep things clean. Okay, that should fetch all of our index comments. So now let's take a look at those results. We should get lists of comments this way. Can't read property map of undefined. Okay. It's all looking good. Something else that is just now occurring to me is created at will not always be trustworthy, but I'm not going to worry about that for now. If we want to deal with that, we could always have the server timestamp whenever it indexes data and use that as a way to kind of deal with that situation. So we have our list of comments now, and now we have to turn them into a tree. And the way to do that is you iterate through them, and that actually should be comment entries. I name them comment entries to remind myself that it has got that that it's got that wrapper around it, so it's not just the values, it's also got the key and the sequence, and the value is actually dot value. So we go through the comments here, and the whole action is to basically build a map of the comments by their URL, and then add a replies field to each of them, and then find the parent, and so on and so forth. This will become clear as we go. So you do comment.url is equal to that comment entry. I'll get to that in a second. And then we look to see if it's got a, what do we call it? Parent comment URL. Hang on, let me think. Think this out before I talk about it. I've done this a million times. I could always just refer to my old code. Why don't I do that? In fact, it should be in this repo. here's my code. I'm going to copy this and refer to this. So you set up replies by URL map. You go through all the comments, and you add them to that map. Yeah, the subject URL is the ID for the thread. And then you go through and construct root replies by looking through the comment entries again. So this is not, you know, there's probably a better way to do all this, but this is how I do it. If it has a parent, which is the parent comment URL, yeah, that all looks fine. Why don't we wrap this in a helper function as well? Just to make it a little easier to look at. So I set up a map of the comment entries by their URL, and then I iterate through, and if it's got a parent, I grab that parent. If it's missing, then we sort of note that that's the case. For the client-side UI to handle, that becomes a problem whenever you get into the peer-to-peer federated context. Won't happen for a little bit on us, but it'll be there eventually. Then you, now you have the parent of the comment that you're looking at. You create that replies array. Add it. Otherwise, if it doesn't have a parent, it's a root comment, goes in the root comment entries. Just like that, we got a tree. Could talk about sorting them, but I'm not going to deal with that yet. Let's just take a look at what that gives us. Alright, so that failed because I have comments entries somewhere, which ought to be giving me a root red squiggly for. Where's my red squiggly? May just be because my computer's too overloaded for it. Okay. That's still wrong. That's still just coming out as if we didn't do any of what I just built. What's that about? It's because I didn't use the value. That wrapper object's killing me. Okay, we are in business, and in fact we did just hit is missing parent because the parent comment dot deleted, which is interesting, and we should consider how to handle that in the future. We may need to get tombstones involved somehow. So rather than just handle that by doing is missing parent, I'm thinking we're gonna create a oh man, that's a tricky situation, because right now when we're not retaining any metadata about a deleted comment, so I'm just gonna leave it as it is for now, to be honest. We'll have to deal with that later. That'll be one of those things. It's a big old pain, but looks like our stuff's correct here. Reply count's wrong. So that needs to be incremented right here. Probably not important to have reply count given that you're getting an array here, but that's sometimes nice to do. Okay. So that thread is correct, so let's go ahead and add some tests. Of course, I always forget to do that. Can't read property key of undefined line 94. That should be 2. Yep, alright. So now comments and posts are in good order. Yeesh. Alright. Time to commit. Alright. That's a fair bit of work handled for us, huh? What do I have left API-wise? Of course, we got following. We got the profile. We got voting. What other indexes did I leave for myself? Just the votes and the featured posts. Okay. And we may actually want to be modifying some of our APIs to be fetching some of that secondary information. Things like getting a post, you may want it to give you the reply count and the vote count, current karma on it. Let's see. Well, that's a good code sprint there of 3 hours. So I'm going to end the stream for now. Might resume it later in the evening. Just going to keep on streaming anytime I work on this, but I think I need a little bit of a break. So I'm going to do that. And I'll just watch the YouTube, see if I pop back up. So y'all enjoy the rest of your Sunday evening or afternoon if I don't see you. And if I do, I'll catch you then. Later.